Hey there, kiddos. Welcome back. Now we're going to hit Chapter 7. Chapter 7 has to do with memory. It's a shame we can't do this really face-to-face because there are some amazing memory exercises that the publisher has included in the PowerPoints. But in lieu of those, I'm going to go out to the internet and find you guys some exercises and demonstrations that you can watch if you want to. So it's really neat the way the memory works and how the memory works, and sometimes when it doesn't work and why it doesn't work. So this can also give you guys maybe a little bit of insight into how your brain works and how your memory works. And if you're having issues other than an underlying physiological issue, maybe this can give you some ways to help with your memory, or at least understand why, and then give you some ideas about how to improve your memory skills. So of course the first thing the textbook always does is tell you the definition, and the definition of memory is retention of information. And there's three different phases of memory. The first is the encoding, and then the storage, and then the retrieval. The encoding is basically just looking at the information and deciding where you want to put it, if you want to put it anywhere. Storage is how long it's stored and what you can do to prolong that storage. And then the retrieval process is how you choose to remember information. So short-term memory is something, is exactly what it says. It is just something that you want to remember short-term, whether it's, back in the day we had to remember phone numbers from the telephone book to the telephone. Now you just give everybody your cell phone and say, hey, or just here's my number, text me, or whatever. But if you're looking for some short-term information, or how to improve your short-term information, look at chunking. So grouping information into units. If you're trying to remember a set of digits, now instead of digits, make them numbers. So instead of 6295, try 62 and 95. So you're not actually having to remember 6295. You're just remembering 62 and 95. So two different units, four digits, yes, but only 2 units, which is going to make it easier to remember. And then of course, if you rehearse it, continuous repetition of the information, that's going to prolong the information, or prolong the duration that it stays in your short-term memory. Just repeating it over and over and trying to remember information until you can write it down. So long-term memory. So non-declarative memory, okay, is affected by past experience without consciously recalling it. But information, if somebody asks you your telephone number, you don't have to think about it. You just do it. So that's your procedural memory. You don't have to think about how to walk. You don't have to think about how to talk. You don't have to think about, when your alarm goes off in the morning, you get up. And then priming, it's, that just like you prime a pump, you just try to get it started. So these are the things that, past experience is leading into what you're trying to recall for long-term, so recalling information without actually having to go, wait a minute, let me think about that. Consciously recalling information is usually information that you would need to do for like a test or something like that. Autobiographical memories, so lifetime periods. If you're together with family members, you guys start talking about, oh my gosh, remember when that summer or that spring break off, or that summer off, this is going to be this now is going to be something that we're going to think about in years going forward, going, oh my gosh, remember, the spring of 2020, the quarantine, #quarantine 2020 or whatever. So this is a lifetime period And then when you guys get together, you're going to reminisce over things that you happened or things that happened. So autobiographical things that are about you. General events, just, what was life like in college, or what was life like in elementary school, middle school, or high school. And then specific or event specific information. Flashbulb memories, basically, they're just like, you don't remember the whole thing, you just remember bits and pieces. In kindergarten, I remember we had, I grew up in rural Alabama, so it was nothing for people to have, farm animals or pets or whatever. And not the normal cats and dogs pets. I mean, we had, I had friends that had chickens, and I had friends that had rabbits, and I had a goat. Things like that. So flashbulb memories is, I remember a friend of mine bringing in her rabbits. Don't remember why she brought them in. Don't remember what happened afterward. All I remember is her bringing in, half dozen bunnies, little baby bunnies, and us as little kiddos getting to sit down and play with them. Traumatic events. If you can remember specific, if you've ever been into a car accident, if you've ever had, something bad happen, whether it's a traumatic injury or any traumatic event, abuse, injury, sickness, things like that in the family. Sometimes we have what's called repressed memories, and repressed memories are memories that we forget because we're motivated to forget. We don't think about it whenever these memories start to happen or pop up. We're like, nope, don't want to think about it, don't want to think about it, don't want to think about it. And after a while, you just don't think about it. So those memories become repressed. But they can be later recovered, either when you feel emotionally safe and are in an environment where you can express those memories, or sometimes once your brain is able to process. So if something happens when you're younger, your brain doesn't necessarily know how to process the information, so it kind of hides that information. And then when you get older and your brain and your emotions are more mature and able to experience that or understand that, then these things start to come out. Freud says this is just a defense mechanism. This is something that we do to help us to deal with stuff that we just don't know how to process or cannot process. There was back in the 80s, I believe, there was a real kind of surge in the psychological community of repressed memories coming back up. A lot of it was having to do with traumatic abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, when people were younger and early adolescence. And what began to happen is because there was just like with anything, if there's a whole lot of something all at once, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Now, how much of this is real and how much of this is created? So there was the question of, how much of this is real, how much of this is created, and how can we go about trying to figure out what's real and what's not? By the time a child is 4 years old, they pretty much have accurate recall. By the time a kiddo is 4, the brain has matured to a point to where they can grab on to, the memory processes have matured to a point to where, memories are more accurate. Memories are less likely to be, you were less likely to fill in the blanks because going from point A to point B doesn't make sense. If you've been abused and you lost that memory, it is absolutely possible to lose those memories because it's just too traumatic to remember nobody wants to remember bad things. So it's easy just to forget them and just, I'm not going to think about it. Is false reconstruction possible? Absolutely. Again, going back to even if we're over 4, even as an adult, if we can't remember, all you can remember is point A and then point B, sometimes we fill in the blanks. We don't necessarily mean to, but sometimes that's just the way the brain does, just like in the, when we're trying to, look at information that's, out there and visible, um, when you see uh, signals or signs and not and the lines are not actually connected. You see an arrow, you see a straight line, and then a part of a triangle above it. You don't see just a line and then part of the triangle. You actually see an arrow. So just like your eyeballs will fill in information, your brain sometimes does too, which creates a false reconstruction. And when this happens, sometimes it's difficult to separate true and untrue memories. Right. So when does this come into play is when, eyewitness testimony. You have to be very, 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 very careful in eyewitness testimony. And the reason it can often be false is because how you put across a question is going to determine how somebody answers that question. It's a bias, and we don't necessarily mean to do it. It's our own individual and personal reaction to what's going on. If you witnessed something to happen, one car hits another car, depending on, did you see the accident? Did you see the car crash? Did you see what happened? So if somebody comes to you and says, did you see the car crash? What that tells your brain is, wow, this is something important. I need to, dig deep and make, this is important. So I need to make it sound important. Not that is that's not necessarily a conscious process. It's just a clue that the brain picks up on and says, okay, wait a minute. This is how it's put across. So this is how it must be. This is how it needs to be relayed. So that's what happens. Again, not on purpose. All right. It's just the brain has a way of connecting the dots in reference to our environment. Some false memories are a failure to distinguish between real memories from generalized thoughts. We can think things, and there have been stories in families where, parents will get together and they'll talk about, our family members will get together and they'll talk about something that happened. And then when the kiddo gets older, they're like, oh yeah, and then retell this story. And I've seen parents go, wait a minute, you weren't even alive when that happened. But the story has been told so often that you have created a visualization. So it's as if that memory is yours, and so you retell it. So it's a distortion. Again, going back to altered by new information, distortion can be altered by new information. You thought it was something, but new information comes out and you're like, oh yeah, so now the brain has to say, well, now I need to put this into perspective. Leading questions, going back to, how did I ask the question? Or if you're trying too hard to remember, something, then you're going to try to fill in those blanks, not necessarily because you mean to, but because you're trying to, fill in the blanks and putting a special effort into trying to fill in the blanks. Sometimes we can have a bias. If we're biased against a certain race, then if we don't remember the exact system, goes, well, what was the race of the person that you saw running? Well, we may have a bias based on experiences that we've had. So we may wind up kind of putting in that racial information into something that's not necessarily there, but because of our brains are already biased, it just kind of happens. Inaccuracy can be caused by memories fading with time. Even if we think we're confident and we think the memory is vivid and we think the memory is clear, sometimes it's not always. Information fades with time. And understand too that every time you retell a story, every time you recall information, you're not just recalling the incident in and of itself. Every time you've recalled that information, you're adding in more information, whether it's usually, it's something like the feeling. The first time I went up to, before my husband and I got married, I took a trip with my husband's mother and my husband's sister up to southern Virginia for a family reunion. And so the three of us girls, it was a road trip. It was fun. It was about a week long. Um, it was an amazing time. And, so the next year when after my husband and I had gotten married, in between. And so the first year that we went up as a married couple, I was telling my husband, oh, this is going to be so much fun. It's so amazing. There was like a county fair thing type going on, where, more like just, more of a, not really a fair because it didn't have rides, but it was, just, small communities gathering and peddling their wares or their, jams and jellies and things like that. But anyway, it was just like like a fun day in the community or fun weekend in the community. And when we got there and I'm experiencing this with my husband, I'm like, wait a minute, it's not nearly as fun as I remembered. It's not nearly as neat as I remember, so because every time I talked about that, the whole experience, it was adding to it every time because I was, adding to the positive feelings or the anticipation. And then when I got there, it's like, oh, it's kind of a letdown. So Ebbinghaus says forgetting is what we would call a memory failure. So we either have an encoding failure, meaning how we initially processed the information wasn't quite correct, or we have what they call a retrieval failure or an interference. Again, adding information that wasn't there, taking away information that was there. And so it's, when we forget something, it's more like if you see your brain as a huge filing cabinet. And if you forget something, it's not necessarily that it's gone. It's just that you kind of stuck it in the wrong place. So when you retrieve it, you go back to where you think it is and it's not there. And you're like, oh, well, that's not right. And so some things will get in the way. So we have proactive interference or retroactive interference. Either we're proactive, meaning we're thinking about something in the future that may cause issues for something that we remember now, or retroactive interference, things that happened in the past that are interfering with things that are going on now. So many different things that can cause us to forget information. Passage of time is going to forget. But this doesn't explain all forgetting. Okay. The tip of the tongue phenomenon is that, oh man, I know it's right there, but I can't say it. Sometimes, so to help with that control, sometimes we have to just, like, you know what, let me just walk away or think about something else. It's like that thinking too hard kind of gets in the way. So sometimes if we just walk away from it, it'll come back. Sometimes I get it in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh, that's what it was. And then, sometimes we can retrieve some of the information, but not all of the information. Like, it starts with, or it has the S in it, or it sounds like, so things like that, that tip of the tongue phenomenon. It's absolutely annoying when it happens. Perspective memory. We need to remember to do something in the future. Like this morning, or last night when I went to bed, I was like, okay, I got to remember, because I almost put it in my phone as a reminder and I didn't. But I'm like, okay, I got to remember in the morning when I get up, the first thing I have to do is, so I had a grocery pickup I had to go do this morning. So I'm like, as soon as I got to go to remember, I got to remember in the morning, as soon as I get up, I got to remember, I got to go do this, I got to go do that. It's remembering to do something. Your homework, you have to remember that, okay, homework is due. And then I have to start working on it before then. So remembering to do something in the future. So remembering what to do and remembering what to do, when to do it. And then, of course, we have absent-mindedness. I know that when I go leave my neighborhood, depending on where I'm going, I'll either have to go left or right. Most of the time I go right. But there's twice a week that I have to go left. And if I'm not paying attention, or if I'm being absent-minded, or if I'm, kind of floating off and thinking about other things, then I'll automatically go right instead of going left, which just really takes me out of my way and causes me just to go, just like really seriously, but, so amnesia. And anterograde amnesia is the ability to store new information and events. Retrograde amnesia is the inability to retrieve past information. So anterograde, you can't remember new stuff. All you have is what you have. You can't add any more. Retrograde is you only have where you are, but you can't remember, what's in the past. We think about this when, we see television shows and it talks about, oh, somebody's got amnesia. What they're talking about is retrograde amnesia, which I can't remember my past. I can't remember who I am. I can't remember where I came from. Okay, so this is the only information that I actually left in the slide as far as kind of an example of memory. So here we go. Retrieval failure. Okay. Looking at this, which of these pennies is correct? So you see, basic things, which way is he facing? Is he facing to the left or is he facing to the right? Where does the year go? Where does the word liberty go? Is what's written above the top? Is there anything written above the top? Right? So when we see this coin, we automatically know it's a penny. But which of these 7 pennies here are the correct one, or is the correct one? And the correct one is C. In God we trust, liberty to the left, year to the right, and he is facing to the right. Right? Good job. So some tips to help, some things to help you when you're studying. Give your undivided attention. As much as we like to say, oh, I can multitask, we're finding out that really multitasking, you're not picking up information. Your brain truly is divided. We may hear information, we may see information, but we're not absorbing all of that information. So giving our undivided attention to whatever it is we're trying to do will help us to remember that. Processing information deeply. Again, this goes back to why I teach the way I do, is giving you, deeper processing. You're seeing it, you're hearing it, you're doing the homework. So you're really getting this information 3 different ways. And I guess technically 4 when we go back to hit the exam and we have more information. So some of this information you're getting up to 4 times. So, so the information you're receiving 4 times, you're more apt to remember than anything else. Making associations, again, that's connecting brain cells, connecting, making more connections. If you think of it as a web, the more places that web is connected, the more avenues there are to get back to that main information. Using imagery. That's why I love reading books, because I may not necessarily be able to remember the words that were used in the books, but as I'm reading, I'm creating images. And so going back, when I'm telling the story about a book I'm reading, I'm not thinking about the words, I'm thinking about the images that I've created while I'm reading this book. We've already talked about chunking, biting down bigger pieces of information into smaller bits. So instead of trying to remember 7 digits or 8 digits, you're only remembering 4 bits of information, pairing 2 digits to make a unit. And then encode early and often, looking at this information, re-looking at this information, and doing so on a regular basis and often, which is why cramming doesn't work. Because when we cram, we get all of this information in a very short period of time, and it's usually at the end of the process, closest to when we're about to study or closest when we're about to take the exam. So it's later on in the process, so you don't have all that time for you, like a sponge. Your brain's like a sponge. So if you want to keep that sponge wet, you want to keep that brain full of information, if you begin the dripping of the process early on, then that sponge is going to start to absorb that information quicker, and it's going to last longer if you continuously drop it. However, if you wait till last minute, you need to watch something really quick, If you pick up a dry sponge and you run it under the water real quick and you try to watch something, that sponge isn't going to pick up all the water, just like your brain isn't going to pick up all the information. So the earlier you start studying and the more often you study, the more apt you are to remember your information. Rehearse, redo your notes, write the notes, rewrite the notes, reread the notes, talk to others, talk to your, other students in the classroom. Sometimes being able to explain it to other people will help. That's one of the things that helped me in my master's program, because I was going down to Orlando every other weekend for about 3 years. I would have the entire weekend. So I would have, so basically one half of the semester would be Friday night, all day Saturday, and then half of Sunday. And so when I would go back to my hotel at the end of the night, Friday night, I would kind of pace my room and talk to myself and try to teach myself the points. And Saturday night, do the same thing. And then on Sunday, on my drive home, that's what I would try to remember everything and try to talk to myself if I didn't have somebody else to talk to. But trying to explain something else, trying to teach somebody else will kind of help you explain it. My daughter has freaking brilliant with math. She didn't get it from me. But she came to me a couple weeks ago and said, Mama, I need you to help me with my geometry. I was like, babe, you know me, I don't do math. I said, so why don't you ask Dad to help? So, and she goes, well, okay, fine. So I went to my husband and I said, look, she needs to come and help you with her geometry. He goes, what do you mean she needs to help me with her geometry? I said, because she doesn't need you to explain it to her, because she knows it. She just needs to be able to explain it to you so that she can work through the process herself. She knows the process, but she needs to talk the process out, because that's how she learns. Testing yourself. You guys are brilliant about being able to, about being able to test yourself, which is why I have posted like a blank in the past. I have posted a blank review, because you guys have the paper review in the classroom that has the answers, but by posting the blank review on Canvas, you guys now have the opportunity to answer all of those questions without looking at the information. So you've got the blank information where you have to actually think about what you're doing. And then along the way, ask yourself questions, ask yourself to explain it, and then rest, and you have to eat well. You've got to sleep the night before. You have to eat well. If you're hungry, your brain isn't being fed. If you're not rested, your brain isn't being fed. So you have to have all of these things kind of in conjunction to help study, again, which is why cramming does not work as well as we thought it would. So anyway, so there you go, chapter 7 with memory. It's a neat chapter. It's a fun chapter. So like I said, I'll try to find some online memory things, just to kind of put everything into perspective. And since we're, and now that we're at home and we're all kind of quarantined, you know, uh, something like this online may be fun. One of the things that I used to do with my kids when they were little is, just take cards and flip the cards upside down, just regular playing cards, and then try to find matches, whether it's, red threes, black threes, aces, whatever. So just to kind of help your memory. It's just something fun, just to kind of help pass the time. But that's how that goes. All right. So in the meantime, if you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, leave them in the discussion on Canvas, and then we'll get to them, or I'll get to them as quickly as I can. In the meantime, you guys stay safe, stay well, and I will talk at y'all later. All right. Take care. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.